Hello honeybees, my name is Raven, this is Jasper, and welcome back to our channel. Subscribe to become part of the hive. Be sure to like and ring the notification bell. Thanks honeybees! Enjoy the video. Meow! So, no cats in this video because every cat in my house is being annoying and I just don't want to deal with them right now. If you own cats, you probably get what I'm saying, so sorry, no cat cameo today, but they're all around, I swear. They're all here. So, I know you might be wondering, Raven, I can tell by the title of this video that you're going to talk about the Hellraiser movies. So why are you dressed like weird, scary, sexy Pennywise? Well, I'll tell you. I've never gotten to wear this outfit before. I bought it a few years ago and I've never worn it, and I thought, you know, with all the videos I have planned, this would be the best time to wear it because I don't really have a Hellraiser outfit. And the Cenobites in the new Hellraiser are like are scary, but they're also kind of sexy. So I thought, you know, well, I'll just wear a costume that's scary and kind of sexy. So sexy Pennywise and then scary makeup. And by scary, I mean the worst makeup I've ever done in my life. But we'll just ignore it. We'll just pretend that I'm not horribly self-conscious in this outfit and talk about the movies. Hellraiser. There's 11 movies in the franchise, including the new one. Now, there's the first one, and then the first one has 9 sequels, and then the most recent one that just came out on Hulu is a reboot. So it is not technically the 10th sequel, it is the first remake reboot. And last year, I actually went through and watched all of the Hellraiser movies because I like, you know, going through a franchise or a series and just kind of watching all of them. I've done it with a bunch of movies. I've watched all of the Children of the Corn, all of the Child's Plays, most of the Halloweens, so I did that with Hellraiser because I'd always been kind of interested in Hellraiser. I'd never really seen the movies before I decided to watch all of them, and I never really heard anybody talk about them, and then I watched them and I found out why people don't talk about them. They're not so great. But let's just start from the beginning. So the first Hellraiser, I guess before I get into it, I am going to talk about all of the movies. I'm going to kind of be more in depth about the first and a little bit of the second one, and then all of them after that are kind of a blur. It's been a little bit since I watched all of them. I certainly was not going to rewatch all 10 previous Hellraiser movies for this video. It was really unnecessary because all of them are bad, except for the second one, which is the only one that's kind of in that linear story with the same characters, and then it's just like different characters but with Pinhead. So I'm going to kind of zoom through all of those ones before we get to the reboot. So starting with the first one, Hellraiser 1, 1987, directed, written by Clive Barker. It is it's not even really about Pinhead, which is the thing. Everyone thinks of Hellraiser, they think of Pinhead, but this movie is more about these human characters. So I'll just get into what it's about. So there's this guy, his name is Frank. He's kind of a deviant. He is traveling the world. He's kind of ran out of human pleasures and human experiences, so he wants something otherworldly. And he buys this box, this little puzzle box that is, it's called like there's like different configurations. There's the first configuration, and there's like 5 more configurations, but that doesn't matter. I'm just going to call it the puzzle box just for to not get too deep into the lore. So he buys this puzzle box, he solves it, he basically gets torn apart and dragged to hell or the Cenobite dimension. The two are sort of one and the same, they kind of differ. It gets a little fuzzy as the films go on, but we'll just say it's hell. Fast forward a little while later, Frank's brother Larry and his wife Julia, are moving into a house where Julia accidentally brings Frank back to life by spilling some blood on the floor under where he unlocked the puzzle box. And it brings him back, but it only partially brings him back. He's like this gooey, weird zombie skeleton guy, and he needs more dead bodies to kind of rejuvenate him. Now, him and Julia, his brother's wife, had an affair in the past, and she still has feelings for him, so she decides to basically help him out by picking up men at bars, bringing them home, and fatally wounding them for Frank to then latch on and kind of suck the life out of them and rejuvenate. And so he becomes like more and more human to a point where he's basically like a person with no skin. And it's pretty ooey gooey, but Julia's still into it, so she still is kind of she still is helping him out, unbeknownst to her husband Larry. Now, Kirsty is Larry's teenage daughter from a previous marriage, and so Julia's stepdaughter and Frank's niece. she kind of figures this out. She ends up finding the puzzle box and solves the puzzle, and when she is faced with the Cenobites, Pinhead and Chatterer, there's one called by the fandom, she's called Deep Throat, but with the implications of that now, that's probably not an appropriate name, but she's probably my favorite Cenobite, but that's beside the point. Tell her that they now own her, basically. They own her soul, but she decides to make a trade. So she points out how Frank has escaped the Cenobites, so her trade is to get Frank to admit that he had evaded them so that they can just take him back rather than take her. So that's kind of what she does. So now she has to find Frank and kind of get him to admit that he had evaded the Cenobites so that they can kind of drag him back to hell and she won't have any more problems. Frank is on to Kirsty. He's still a deviant. He's still obviously a bad guy. So he ends up killing Larry and wearing his skin to try to pose as Larry and trick Kirsty. It doesn't really work. He ends up trying to kill Kirsty as Larry, her father. He accidentally kills Julia and then just absorbs Julia instead, not even caring. He didn't care about her at all. She was just like the vessel to bring him bodies, essentially. And then while he is in Larry face, Frank admits that he killed Larry to pose as him. The Cenobites take that as all the proof that they need, drag him back to hell. Kirsty's free. That's the first Hellraiser. Now that movie's really good. That movie's got a good, like, scary, creepy ambiance. It's mostly about Julia and Frank, and later Kirsty. Kirsty's our hero. Julia and Frank are our antagonists. And there's really not that much Cenobite content in it. They're shown throughout the movie, but like just enough so that they're still scary. The thing about monsters and creatures and otherworldly things is you can't show them too much because the more mystery, the more we're afraid, the more we're anticipating. We don't know what they're capable of. And this movie does that really, really great. I am a big fan of the first Hellraiser, and like I said, the best part is the mystery. We don't really know where the Cenobites come from. We assume they're like demons. We know they're from hell. They're there to inflict pain and pleasure. They're mutilated themselves. We don't know where they came from, how they got that way. And that's the scary part. They're there to inflict carnal pain and pleasures and just sort of torture people and tear them apart when they solve this puzzle box. Where did the box come from? Who knows? I don't know. That's what makes it so scary. Now, for the rest of the movies, all that gets ruined. Starting with Hellraiser Hellbound, aka Hellraiser 2, which came out the following year and sort of continues to follow Kirsty's storyline right after the events of the first Hellraiser. Kirsty is in a psychiatric ward, but actually the film opens with Pinhead before he became Pinhead. He was a military officer. He solves the puzzle box. We see all the pins shoot into his face and him become Pinhead. So now we know that Pinhead is not this otherworldly creature that came from who knows where. He was a human who solved the puzzle box and became the Lord of Hell because of that. So, okay, whatever. So anyway, Kirsty is in a psychiatric ward now, and she's talking to her doctor, I believe his name is Dr. Cunningham, and kind of about what happened. And of course, nobody really wants to believe her. Dr. Cunningham secretly does, though. He's actually secretly an enthusiast of the Cenobites in hell. He's able to find the mattress that Kirsty's stepmother Julia died on. He gets a patient to lay on it, cut himself, bleeds, brings Julia back to life. So it's basically really similar to the events of the first film, where Julia brought Frank back to life and has to bring him people to get him to live. In this one, the doctor brings Julia back to life and brings her patients and other people for her to feed on and come back to life because he falls in love with Julia. So it's a repeat of that storyline, but then now Kirsty is in it from the beginning and knows what's happening. There's another patient that gets dragged into it and forced to solve the puzzle box so that Julia and the doctor can kind of enter the Cenobite dimension where we see Pinhead and the other Cenobites. And so really a big portion of the movie is in the Cenobite dimension, or hell. Again, sort of one and the same. It's a little bit fuzzy. It's not like exactly hell, but it's also not exactly its own dimension. It's sort of its own new thing. Julia betrays the doctor who has fallen for her. He ends up becoming a Cenobite himself, which is a cool process. I do like in these movies it happens a few times where regular people become Cenobites. It's also in the second one that we see the other Cenobites, Chatterer and the lady with her her throat cut open, what they look like as humans. And as cool as that was, it also did kind of ruin the mystery and make the Cenobites less scary, just knowing that they were humans who solved the puzzle box previously and turned into Cenobites. It sort of, in my opinion, makes them a little bit less evil. But, you know, otherwise the sequel is okay. I mean, it's what I would expect from a sequel. Not as good as the first, but not terrible. Usually the follow-up to a really good film is not as great because they try to give more information on what we saw in the first film. And, you know, that's just what made the first film work, is that we didn't know, and that's what made it scary. So it made it a little bit less frightening, and the characters weren't as interesting. Frank is still in this one. We kind of see him in the Hell Dimension, but it's not about him. And so... yeah, I don't really care about Dr. Cunningham. I never really cared much about Julia. Kirsty's okay, but she's just, you know, there's really not much to her other than she's the hero, she's the protagonist. So, you know, it's okay. It kind of wraps it in this bow. Kirsty and Tiffany escape. Julia stays in hell. Frank is still in hell, and all that jazz. So that's Hellraiser and Hellraiser Hellbound, aka Hellraiser 2. That, you know, would have just been a good little set. You know, you don't even need a trilogy, just the movie and the sequel, and that would have been fine. But then they decided to make 8 other Hellraiser movies that they just go downhill from here, and these ones I'm definitely not going to spend a lot of time on. I'm just going to kind of run through it. So, okay, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. In this one, Pinhead is trapped in a statue. It doesn't really matter why, but this guy who owns a nightclub, this asshole who owns a nightclub, I should say, JP, buys the statue. It is in his bedroom, which is attached, his house is sort of attached to the nightclub. He brings a girl back, they do some stuff. She ends up going up to the statue, her skin gets sucked off, and then she gets sucked into the statue. And that's how JP finds out that Pinhead is in there, so he, of course, starts bringing girls and people from the nightclub to Pinhead, and, yeah, to try to bring him back out of the statue. Why he does this? He's just a bad guy. He doesn't care. I don't know. Meanwhile, there's this reporter, Joey, who is trying to figure out what's kind of happening with these missing people. She ends up with the box. Pinhead is trying to get the box back from her. Well, I'm trying to recollect these movies. It's kind of difficult. They all just sort of run together, but they're really going to get less and less clear as I go on. So, okay, anyway. Joey has the box. Pinhead's trying to get the box back. In order to get it back, he turns a whole bunch of people into Cenobites really quickly in really strange ways. There's one with, like, a video camera in his head. There's one with, like, CDs in his head. He's CD head. I don't know. But Joey solves the box and ends up sending everybody back to hell. I mean, that's really the only theme in all of the Hellraiser movies is 1, Pinhead, but 2, someone solves the box. I mean, it has to happen in every single one. So, that's Hellraiser Hell on Earth, aka Hellraiser 3. Hellraiser Bloodline, aka Hellraiser 4. The most notable thing about this movie is that it features Adam Scott in his first ever feature film role. So that was really cool to see him. He's in the old-timey portion because in Hellraiser Bloodline, it's all about 3 generations of this family and their interactions with the puzzle box and Pinhead. In this film, we actually see the origins of the puzzle box. It is made by a toy maker who was influenced, I guess, by demons of hell or the Cenobites that may have already existed into making some sort of portal to their dimension. So he makes this puzzle box, and yeah. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. That's okay. It doesn't have to. I mean, I wish it did, but okay. So, the toy maker's descendants, years later, we're now in the 90s, which is when this movie came out, 1996, played by the same actor who played the old-timey toy maker, is building a skyscraper that resembles the puzzle box. In this one, it actually is not just Pinhead, it's also Angelique, who's another sort of demon Cenobite lady. Her thing is all about temptation and trying to drag people into hell by tempting them, whereas Pinhead's whole thing is all about pain and suffering. He just wants to bring as much pain and suffering as possible. So they have their whole thing with the modern day Mr. Merchant. That's his name. I didn't mention that, but that's his name. Pinhead kills them. They somehow get sent back to hell anyway. And then in the future of the year 2127 in space, the descendant Dr. Merchant activates the Elysium configuration in the box, which is like when you solve it. It's called the Elysium configuration. When you solve it, there's multiple ways to solve it, and each one has a different configuration. The Elysium configuration is what destroys Pinhead. So 3 generations, old-timey, modern day, at the time and future, of this one guy and his descendants interacting with Pennywise. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's nothing, really nothing more interesting to say. It reminds me a little bit of like Jason X, when they're like, oh, we did so much with Jason on Earth, what can we do? Let's put him in space. And so they're like, oh, let's do that with Pinhead. Let's put Pinhead in space, in the future, in the past. Let's put him everywhere. But then they still made like 5 more movies after this. So yeah. So that brings us to Hellraiser Inferno. aka Hellraiser 5. A corrupt cop, which is an oxymoron, Joseph, finds the box at what seems to be a ritualistic murder scene. He solves the box and then starts to see hallucinations. There's this murderer that he's chasing that's sort of happening at the same time he's seeing these hallucinations of like bad things happening and peaks of the Cenobites and things like that. And said murderer starts killing Joseph's friends and associates because he knows Joseph is on his trail, and he had previously kidnapped a child and is leaving one of the child's fingers at each of the murder scenes. Yeah. Joseph ends up going to see a psychiatrist to talk about all these hallucinations and all the stuff that he's going through, only to find out that the psychiatrist is Pinhead, and he reveals that he's been psychologically torturing him the whole time, and everything about the murderer and people getting killed was all happening inside his head. He's basically been in limbo, and the child that was kidnapped and had his fingers cut off represents Joseph's innocence that he himself is killing through his own corruption and violent acts. Then Joseph gets an eternity of torment for his sins and gets torn apart with chains and stuff ripping his face apart. So that's Hellraiser Inferno. Next, Hellraiser Hellseeker, aka Hellraiser 6. Whew! Alright, over halfway done. Okay, here we go. This guy Trevor crashes his car and has his wife in it as well, but his wife's body is never found after it has crashed. He is a suspect in his wife's murder because her body was never found. He starts having hallucinations. He's starting to confuse what is real with what is in his imagination. He's really not sure. There's 2 detectives that are kind of investigating him, but they're never in the same place at the same time, and we later find out they're actually a 2-headed monster. Okay. So we see later Pinhead reveals himself to Trevor and tells him that his wife, Kirsty, from the first and second movie, Kirsty's back. Kirsty is Trevor's wife, and she found out that Trevor was cheating on her multiple times and just not being a very good husband. And Trevor actually had a plan to get Kirsty to solve the puzzle box so that Kirsty would get dragged into hell so he wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. Because that's so much easier than just killing your wife, you know what I mean? Or leaving her, maybe. I don't know. I've never been married. So, Kirsty solves the box, but because this is not her first rodeo, she makes a deal with Pinhead to give him 5 souls in exchange for herself. So, she kills 3 of Trevor's mistresses and Trevor's best friend, who is also in the plot to kill Kirsty for her fortune, which she also has, and the last body that she offers up is Trevor. So it ends with Trevor is kind of in this morgue, and Pinhead reveals himself in the morgue and sort of explains all of this plot twist, that it was Kirsty the whole time, and that Trevor, nothing that happened to him since the crash was actually real. He actually was dead. Kirsty shot him while he was driving. He crashed the car and blamed his death on the crash. And so everything that's happened since the car crash in the beginning didn't actually happen. It was just Trevor being psychologically tortured in limbo. and Kirsty offered up him and 4 other people for her own soul. So Kirsty goes 3. Kirsty wins again. So that's Hellraiser Hellseeker. That one was interesting because they did try to tie it back to the original by bringing Kirsty back, and it was a really interesting concept. Like, it pulled that, oh, nothing was real trope cliche, but they did it in a way that I appreciated in theory, but in actuality, it was boring. So, by the way, if any of these sound interesting past the first 2, I promise you they're not. So, like, don't watch them, even out of curiosity. Even when we get to the one, Hellraiser Debtor. I know that sounds stupid. It's because it is. Hellraiser Debtor, aka Hellraiser 7. There is a cult called the Debtors because they resurrect people. There's a reporter, Amy, who is investigating this cult, and she finds this box that was in, like, the hand of one of the dead cult members who had, like, sent them a tape of the cult or something like that. So she has the box. She ends up finding the leader of the cult who wants to be the leader of the Cenobites. So he's basically trying to, like, get their attention by killing people and bringing them back to life in this Debtor cult. And we find out he is a descendant of the toy maker from Hellraiser Bloodline. So trying to tie it in again, but tying it into one of the bad sequels. So, I appreciate them trying. Anyway, this cult leader kills and reanimates Amy, and while that is happening to her, she is sort of reliving her past where she was assaulted by her father as a child, and she ended up killing her father. And of course, the Cenobites are, like, super attracted to this, like, pain and suffering that she's remembering and experiencing, and come to try to get her and drag her to hell into their dimension. She ends up killing herself so that they can't do that, and they get sent back to hell because they are not able to take Amy, because Amy chooses to take herself rather than be taken by Pinhead and the other Cenobites and tortured for the rest of her life. Yeah. Hellraiser Hellworld, which is the 8th one. You're going to be tempted to watch this one because this is a very early Henry Cavill film, but he does nothing for it, okay? It's not good. So, Hellraiser Hellworld. This one was interesting because it was originally not planned as a Hellraiser film. It's sort of like about, this one is, I think this is in 2001. It's in the early 2000s, maybe mid-2000s at this point. But it's sort of about, like, the internet, and there's this, people are, like, addicted to this RPG game called Hellworld, and then people who play the game get invited to this house. And so it really doesn't, like, you can see how if you just take the Cenobites out of it, it would have been its own movie. It still would have been bad, but, you still could have had a complete movie. Anyway, this was also the last film in the Hellraiser series to feature Doug Bradley as Pinhead. None of the other ones after this have Doug Bradley as Pinhead. He's been Pinhead the whole time. That's, like, his most iconic character. And then when they tried to revamp the series twice before the most recent Hellraiser, they did not use Doug Bradley. And those movies still sucked. So, that didn't solve anything. Anyway, back to Hellraiser Hellworld, which was actually 2005, so I was right at this early 2000s. Early internet age, when everything was about the internet, and oh my god, the internet's so dangerous, you could just get sucked up right into it. So yeah, a group of people who are addicted to playing this online computer game, Hellworld, which is based on the Hellraiser series. Could have been anything, but that was just kind of their way to tie it in, was to based on the Hellraiser series. They get invited to this Hellworld party, which was 2 years after this guy, Adam, killed himself because he was super immersed in the game. Why that led to killing himself, it's sort of explained in the movie, but, like, you gotta have a death in your opening scene, so that's what that was. Anyway, 2 years after that, they go to this private Hellworld party in this old mansion. Henry Cavill and then 2 of his friends, or 3 of his friends, go, and yeah, some of them are into the party, some of them are not. There's a host, they show around the mansion, boring. I don't really know what else to say. They all eventually get trapped inside the house in different rooms, and the host reveals himself as Pinhead, and then the other Cenobite minions kind of come out and torture them, essentially, in different ways. It's like a chase that all kind of happens in different parts of this mansion. It turns out that the host, Pinhead, has given everyone a powerful psychedelic to make them all hallucinate, and all their experiences in the house, all this like crazy, scary stuff that's been happening and getting trapped and seeing things has been a result of that. And yeah, and then our final girl is this girl named Chelsea, who I haven't previously mentioned because none of the characters matter. She finds out that all her friends are dead, and that's it. Oh yeah, and then they find the guy Adam who had killed himself in the beginning. She like sees him in the window. Later, like they're going through Adam's stuff and find the puzzle box in the lament configuration is what it's called. Is the first configuration, the lament configuration. But again, I was just calling it the box. That's the first configuration. They find out and that he had the box and presumably solved it, and yeah, that's what brought the Cenobites out. So yeah, sorry that was a really bad recap of that movie, but that movie is really boring. They just get worse and worse, like I'm telling you. The other ones I tried to be engaged in while I watched them. They were still super boring, but this one especially, and then the next two after this were just so hard to get through. I watched all of them fairly recently, and I just can't even remember what happened. The only thing I remember about Hellworld is that Henry Cavill is in it, and at one point this chick in a mask goes down on him. That's all you need to know about that movie. All right, we're almost done. Hellraiser Revelations. Okay, I'm going to do this one as fast as possible. These two guys, Steven and Nico, run away to party in Mexico. There's this video showing kind of their final moments, and the puzzle box can be seen in this video. We find out that that Nico, while he is in Mexico, killed a girl while having sex with her, and that sort of brought the Cenobites out. This movie ends when the Cenobites are taking Nico away again after he is regenerated, and then Emma's father shoots and kills Nico as an act of revenge. And then the Cenobites take Emma's mother as replacement, and that's it. Nothing matters, none of these characters matter, and that's the end of the movie. Okay, the last one before we get to the remake is Hellraiser Judgment. This one is interesting because it was only made so that Dimension Films could keep the rights to the Hellraiser franchise. If you have rights to a film, there's rules that you have to like make films in that series with that name to keep those rights, so they got to the point where they had to do that. This one is pretty recent. It came out in 2018. Nobody ever talked about it because it's really bad. So, and in this one is like a weird combo of like, you could definitely see that they took inspiration from like Saw and Seven and then just added Cenobites to it, but none of it worked. There's like these three detectives solving this murderer who kills based on the Ten Commandments, so, you know, we've all seen that before. The only other thing of note is that there's an angel in this one who's named Jophiel, and then God appears and at the end to expel Pinhead from hell and forces him to walk the earth as immortal. Everything in between that doesn't matter. You're probably tired of me trying to explain these movies at this point, and that one is literally the most nothing of the nothing films because it was just made so that they could keep the name, and it's a waste of a movie. So we don't even really have to talk about that one. Cool, awesome, we're done. Moving on, finally, to the new Hellraiser, Hellraiser 2022, which is not a sequel, it is a reboot, and it was straight to Hulu. I watched it, and I liked it. I had mentioned in a previous movie review that I was really looking forward to this movie because I had watched all the Hellraisers, and the only good one was the first one, with the second one just being okay, and all of the rest of them are trash, which I just illustrated for you. You're welcome. And so I was really excited to get another good Hellraiser movie because the concept of the Hellraiser movies and the Cenobites is very interesting with this puzzle box and people getting tempted and tortured. You could do a lot of stuff with it. It can be really scary. It could be really cool. And this one seems like they finally tried to reach that potential that these films have. So Hellraiser 2022 stars this girl Riley, who is a recovering addict, and she lives with her brother Matt's boyfriend Colin, and another roommate Nora. And she's kind of struggling. She's going through it. She hasn't been sober for very long. Matt, her brother, loves her but doesn't really trust her, and she's sort of dating / hooking up with this guy Trevor, who she met in a 12-step program, or who she met in rehab, and Matt doesn't trust him because, oh, who hooks up with a girl he met in rehab? Well, this guy. And we find out that he's not actually a great guy because he tempts Riley with robbing this truck to get extra money after she is having this whole fight with her brother about where her life is going, and so she decides to go with Trevor to rob this truck. And in this truck they find a safe. Inside the safe they find the puzzle box. Now this is one of those movies that brings back the notion of the puzzle box sort of changing shape with each configuration. The opening of this film is actually this young guy walking into a mansion and solving the puzzle box while it is shaped more like a long twisted rectangle, or diamond rectangle thing, solving it and then getting chained and torn apart. So we know that the box is going to change shape as it gets solved, and that's pretty cool. Solving a puzzle box and then the puzzle actually it's not the same puzzle every time. So anyway, they find the puzzle box in this safe. Riley decides to take it home. She comes back really late. She was drinking. Matt kicks her out of the apartment, and she's in this park. While she's in this park, she solves the puzzle box, and this blade pops out of it. But she's able to not get cut by it, because that's the whole point of the blade coming out, is to cut whoever solved the box to get their blood and to bring out the Cenobites. But Riley had her hands in such a way where she didn't get cut, luckily. Now, Matt goes out and finds her, picks up the box, and accidentally gets cut by it. So while he's trying to clean up in the bathroom while she is sitting outside, we hear screaming, and she goes in to find that he is no longer there. So now Riley and Colin and Nora are on a quest to find Matt and what happened to him, while Riley is getting increasingly interested in this puzzle box. And as they're trying to find Matt and kind of figure out what's happening, Riley keeps seeing glimpses of Pinhead, who in this movie is called the Priestess, and the other Cenobites, who they all look like women. They might all be women, and I really like their design, I must say. Like I said earlier, they're scary but kind of sexy. But I like what they did with them. I've always liked the design of the original Cenobites, not the ones in the movies where it's a normal person who was made into a Cenobite. Those were never interesting. But Pinhead and Chatterer and all those OGs were always really interesting. So these designs, they didn't just copy them. Of course, Pinhead is the same because that's sort of the image of Hellraiser. Played by a woman now, which is cool. But the other ones are new Cenobites, and there's one that's also based on Chatterer because that's also an iconic image. But there's more than just those two, and all the ones that they introduced were very interesting. So we find out in this movie that after every configuration is solved, a blade comes out to cut the person or to be used to cut somebody, and then that person is the next to be dragged to hell and tortured by the Cenobites. So this happens, unfortunately, to their roommate Nora, who gets stabbed inside the wall. They're in this mansion that resembles the puzzle box. It's the mansion from the opening scene, where we find out later that this billionaire guy Roland created this mansion to resemble the puzzle box to sort of keep the Cenobites out as part of this grander plan. And he himself, Roland, is alive, living in the walls, still trying to bring the Cenobites back to him because he killed people with every configuration. He originally had the box. With every configuration, he killed somebody, and then when you reach the last configuration, you get a reward from the Cenobites, which could be power, it could be of resurrection. There's a couple different possibilities. And the reward he chose ended with him being mutilated with this machine in his chest that is constantly messing with his nerves so that he is constantly in pain. So he's trying to summon them again to sort of change this reward. Riley is accidentally on this same path. She keeps solving the puzzle box, or people around her keep accidentally solving the puzzle box, getting cut and then getting tortured and dragged away. And she is seeing the Cenobites who are telling her, keep giving us sacrifices and you'll get what you want. And she is trying not to, but it just sort of keeps happening, that she keeps accidentally giving them sacrifices. But once she figures this out, she actually solves the box and uses the blade to stab one of the Cenobites. and then that Cenobite gets ripped apart, just like a human would. Which is really interesting that the Cenobites are not immune to this. It can happen to them as well, and they fully accept that. So once Riley figures that out, her plan is to just have the rest of the sacrifices be Cenobites, and then claim her reward to be resurrection, as in resurrecting her brother Matt. But as this goes on, things begin to unravel. We find out that Trevor is actually working with the billionaire guy Roland to bring him more sacrifices to bring the Cenobites back, and Riley was originally supposed to be a sacrifice. Trevor knew that the puzzle box was in the safe that they cracked and were trying to steal. So in uncovering this and going through these events, Riley ends up choosing Trevor to be the last sacrifice and saving Colin, her brother's boyfriend, who was originally intended to be a sacrifice because he accidentally got cut. She decided to trade him with one of the Cenobites. She makes a trade for Trevor. So Trevor gets dragged to hell. His plan backfires. You never want to be involved with the Cenobites because it's more than likely you're going to be ended up being tortured or torn apart and dragged to hell. So, just don't get yourself involved. So anyway, she ends up giving all those sacrifices, and Pinhead offers her a reward and she gets to choose. But at this point, Riley realizes that the rewards are going to be twisted, and she's not actually going to get what she wants. So she decides to forego the reward and just wants the Cenobites to leave and take the box with them and not bother them again.
I've seen your rewards. I know my brother's gone. I don't want anything from you. Nothing.
And Pinhead Priestess says, okay, well, then you just have to live with this guilt of what you've done forever. All these people are dead because of you.
You have chosen
a life of regret. Knowing everything you've done. Everyone you've hurt and lost.
your suffering has barely begun.
But in Riley's mind, that's much better than what the reward would be, which she's right, because she wouldn't just get Matt back. She would also probably get torn apart and flayed and chained to hell. So she chooses the hard thing, but the right thing. That she's just going to live on, and Matt is gone forever, and she has accepted that. And yes, it's her fault, but really, at least she thinks, but really, she had no control. So she just decides to live with that and go off with her remaining friends who are still alive, and then just try to rebuild her life from there. And then the prologue is that Roland turns into a Cenobite, and we see the process of his face getting ripped in a very specific way, and kind of this heaven transformation scene. That was really cool. Like I said, I do like the sequences when people are turned into Cenobites, and this one felt earned because he did solve the puzzle box and ask for his replacement reward to be power. So Leviathan, the big evil god of the Cenobites, takes him and turns him into a Cenobite, which, how much more power can you get? So this new Hellraiser, I liked. I really liked the character design the most. I liked the ambiance. It was really creepy. The only, I guess complaint I would have about it is, there were some slower periods that sort of dragged that could have been cleaned up a little bit. But other than that, there was also not a whole lot of, gore. The whole thing with Cenobites is that they torture. And the thing about, all the movies really is that there's a lot of blood. There's a lot of getting torn apart. There's a lot of people getting skinned and stabbed and this and that. And this one, they didn't really show all that much, which is fine. You don't have to. It was scary in other ways. Roland's machine that sort of twisted his nerves around was actually pretty cool and really, made me really queasy. Just imagining what that would feel like. And with the chains getting torn into people's limbs. So they weren't too much with it. Me, I just like gore. I just like blood. I just would have because some of them we don't really see. When Matt gets dragged away, all we hear is him screaming, which is scary in itself. But, at some point I would have liked a little bit more in the beginning, because the whole, the first 2 acts, not a whole lot of scary things happen. They sort of saved it all for the final act when everything picks up and we see all the Cenobites at once and all these deaths are happening in succession. So if they sort of like spread all that out throughout the entire film, I think it would have been a little bit more interesting. But other than that, I like the characters. They weren't all super well-rounded. Riley is definitely the character with the most personality. She's the one we're supposed to relate to. She's a little bit of a fuck up, but she's trying to get her life back on track, but she slips a little bit, and we can all relate to that in one way or another. The other characters didn't really have much to them. They were just sort of there, and which made me feel like they were just there to be killed, which is really, whenever there's like nothing characters in a horror, you know that they're just going to be killed. Like the roommate Nora specifically, she really we knew nothing about her. She didn't really speak all that much. All we knew is she was the roommate, so obviously she was going to be one of the ones to go. And her sequence where she's sort of losing consciousness in the back of their van and then appears in front of the Cenobites and then gets like stabbed through the neck with a pin from that Pinhead takes from her own head, that was really cool. I think I would have liked to know a little bit more about Nora and who she is before she was tortured. It might have made me feel a little bit more for her. So, but otherwise, this film was, at least compared to the other Hellraiser movies, really, really good. Comparing it just to the first one, it's a good, well-rounded reboot. They didn't just try to do the same thing, which I really appreciated. It wasn't just trying to bring somebody back to life. They weren't trying to remake Hellraiser. They were trying to take the concept of Hellraiser and make it something new, which I really appreciate with reboots, because I've already seen the first movie. I don't want to see the first movie again, but modern. You know what I mean? But cleaner. More HD, but it's just the same story again. This was a completely different story with the same spirit, I guess you could say. So yeah, I liked it. I would recommend it. But it wasn't like great. I only watched it because I know of the Hellraiser franchise. If it was its own movie, I would still think it would be okay. All in all, I would give it probably like a 3 or a 3.5 out of 5. It was an average movie. I do recommend it. Is it going to be one of the greats? Probably not. I mean, but what more can you ask for a reboot of an old franchise, you know? Hey, it's Editor Raven and October coming at you a month after this video was filmed with a different hairstyle, just to find out that in editing I lost the whole outro to my video, so I'm gonna add that in now. I think my last thoughts that got cut off was that I appreciated the Hellraiser remake more than like the Halloween remakes and like this new trilogy, Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends. At least Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills, I liked it more then because, like I was saying, it's like a new idea. It took the same concept but had all new characters and all new storyline. Whereas like the Halloween remake and Rob Zombie's was just like the same thing over again. It's like I already saw that, you know? I don't want to see the same thing but just like super polished. So that's it. And I think that's the reason I liked Halloween Ends the best out of that specific trilogy, was because they actually tried to do something different with like the same concept and same spirit of the original story, but something completely new and different until the end. But Halloween Ends will have to be a video for another time. I really like the Hellraiser remake. Just in conclusion, first one's great, second one's okay, the rest are shit until we get to the remake. So, you know, hope you enjoyed my video. I worked really hard on it. Let me know if there's anything else that I should watch series-wise or just in general that I can talk about. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. See you later. Thanks for watching, honeybees. Make sure to like and subscribe. Bye! Meow!